My name's Erwin Chemerinsky, and I'm the Dean of the Law School. It's a real pleasure and honor to welcome you to this event, which is the beginning of our Center on Land Use, Environment, and Natural Resources. From the very beginning, when I became Dean of the Law School, I said that I wanted one of our areas of emphasis to be on environmental law. When you think about the legal issues that confront our society and the world, there are none more important than this. When you think of Southern California, you immediately see why it would be desirable for here at UCI to make a focus of the law school on land use, environment, and natural resources. But also, given the strengths of this campus, it was a natural focus. So many parts of this campus are doing excellent work with regard to land use, environment, and natural resources. And there's already on the faculty at UCI a leading expert in the law in the area, Joe Demento, who's here in the front row. So as we began hiring for the faculty, it was always with an eye to building this as a real strength of law school. We're incredibly fortunate to have Alex Camacho join us, and I'll introduce Alex to you in just a moment. Alex has really taken the lead in building this center. He's working with a small committee that included Joe Demento, Kerry Mecometto, and Michael Robinson Dorn. They came up with the title, which has the great acronym CLEANER, and the goal is to make this a leading center, not just in Southern California, but nationally, in dealing with those issues that affect land use, environment, and natural resources. And I'm so appreciative that Alex Camacho agreed to be the first director of the center. And I'm going to briefly introduce him to you, and I'm going to let him introduce our speaker, Richard Lazarus. We couldn't have a better possible speaker to kick off the Institute. If you don't know, Alex received his undergraduate degree here at UCI, received a law degree from Harvard, and then an LM from Georgetown. He began his teaching career at Notre Dame Law School, and we're so fortunate to be able to lure him away from that. I'm sure that the weather, though not today, played a role in that regard. But he is one of the leading experts in environmental law in the country. As I say, I'm so grateful that he's willing to be the first director of this center. I'm going to ask Alex to tell you a little about the center, and most of all, to introduce Professor Lazarus to you.
So thank you, Erwin, and for your kind words and for your great support for the Environmental Law Clinic. It's definitely, Environmental Law Center too, clinic, definitely. But for our center here. And I thank you all for coming and for making this event a success. The UCI Law Center for Land, Environment, and Natural Resources is really, its goal is really ambitious. It's really seeking to make UCI a hub for environmental law. Not just in the region, not just nationally, but internationally. And many people here know that UCI has a great history for addressing complex environmental issues across various different disciplines. And this center really follows very much in that tradition. Our plan is to draw on UCI's existing strengths in environmental science, in the various different sciences, environmental social science, and then add law to the equation. And with our partners on campus, such as the Newkirk Center for Science and Society, we already planned various different events. So I just wanted to highlight some of those for you so that you've got them in your calendar. One of them is going to be, besides this inaugural event, interdisciplinary conferences on pesticides and on ocean pollution for this April and November, respectively. In addition, we're going to be having a week-long institute, again co-sponsored with the Newkirk Center, on sustainability for emerging international leaders for this summer. This annual speaker series, which this year is going to be focused on disaster law, and various different other programs. Some of them focused on students, and some of them focused on the broader community. So we hope you can plan to attend some of these events as well. So enough about the center. Let me briefly introduce our distinguished speaker for today. Professor Richard Lazarus is the Howard and Katherine Aibel Professor of Law at Harvard University. He is well known to many of us as a great environmental law scholar, a great environmental law teacher. I've sat in his classes when I was a fellow at Georgetown. It was quite impressive. And when he was a professor at Georgetown, and an environmental law advocate. He's represented a range of governments, local, state, and the federal government in 40 cases before the United States Supreme Court. More recently, and more directly related to, I believe, his talk for today, he served as the executive director for President Obama's National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which was charged with investigating the 2010 oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico and recommending changes in law and in policy to reduce the risk and harms from future spills. So the world watched as Professor Lazarus and this commission investigated one of the worst environmental disasters in our recent history, and we're honored to have him here to reflect on his experiences there as our inaugural speaker. So please join me in welcoming him.
Thanks, Alex. I'm delighted to be here and to give this talk today. Most importantly, to celebrate UC Irvine School of Law's creation of this new Center on Land, Environment, and Natural Resources with this inaugural lecture. This is my first visit to UC Irvine campus, but I see a lot of familiar faces here. I have a lot of close friends and colleagues, including here on the faculty. Professor Joe Demento, who is really a giant in the field of environmental law. And we were former colleagues at the Justice Department back in 1986. So that's a while ago. Professor Carrie Menkelmeadow and I, and Carrie, as you all know, is really the person who created the field of dispute resolution. We were colleagues on the faculty at Georgetown. Michael Robinson Dornan, I've known for a long time for his clinical work, and of course, Professor Camacho was at Georgetown as a fellow before he joined the academy. And then, of course, everyone knows your dean, a very quiet, unassuming legal scholar. All right, my primary talk for today is about my recent service as executive director of the President's Oil Spill Commission investigating the Gulf oil spill. I want to talk about both procedure and substance. I'm trying to give you an insider view of the challenges of launching this kind of investigation on behalf of the President, and then in particular the challenges the Gulf oil spill presented. I think actually the procedure inside look is no less interesting than the substance of what we found, and I think it's also hard to understand our findings and our conclusions unless you understand that procedural context. But I also want to place the spill and its investigation in some historical context. The 2010 Gulf oil spill was clearly an environmental catastrophe, but catastrophes have long served as a major force in the emergence and evolution of modern environmental law here in the United States. So my talk is going to have three parts. First, the role of catastrophe in environmental law. The second, the April 2010 Gulf oil spill and the challenge of its investigation. And finally, what we found and the import for the future of environmental law. So first, catastrophes. Now, a strictly empirical matter, catastrophes have clearly played a sustained role in influencing the emergence of modern environmental law in the United States, certainly during the 1970s. The roots of the 1970s laws are really traceable to a series of discrete events that occurred in this nation, which really captured the fears of the American people, beginning in the 1940s and culminating in the 1960s. That includes the dangers of air pollution brought home by the events in Denora, Pennsylvania in the 1940s, where 20 people died, 1,000 were injured, and that event really brought home the clear significance of the public health stakes of air pollution. The dangers of water pollution, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, seemingly literally on fire, as anomalous as that would appear to be. The Santa Barbara oil spill, closer here to home, that was brought into everyone's home, though, because of the advent of satellite TV. So people for the first time could see live images of what was happening with the Santa Barbara oil spill. The danger of toxic chemicals in the nation's air, water, and its food supply. DDT on the nation's crops, indeed in the neighborhoods as well. And of course, no one gave better expression to these fears than Rachel Carson, whose words of potential catastrophe were in the title of her celebrated book. And the dangers of radiation, the ultimate catastrophe. Invisible, but deadly, from nuclear explosions, it gave new meaning to catastrophe. No less than the planet and life itself seemed to be in the balance. And for those who were alive back then, the ready reminder of what was referred to as the doomsday clock, where actually they would tell you how close we were to midnight, the end of life on Earth, given the risk of nuclear warfare. The political movement rose out of these fears, fears of catastrophe and the aspirations for a better world. And federal lawmakers in the U.S., but also in many states, but just focusing on federal laws, they enacted sweeping new statutes. Here are the laws passed just in the 1970s. Law after law after law. Pollution control laws, natural resource conservation management laws, and the laws showed increasing detail and prescription over time. It was the threat of catastrophe which propelled lawmaking. It broke through the log jams in Congress. To get Congress to enact what we perceived in the late 1970s as laws needed to address abandoned and active hazardous waste sites around the country, the Department of Justice launched a series of lawsuits, 50 lawsuits almost simultaneously, addressing these sites around the country on very, very tenuous legal grounds. The legal theories were thin at best. But the object of the suits was part to publicize the problem, to publicize Love Canal, to publicize the Valley of Drums in Kentucky, to publicize the Stringfellow site here in California, to get Congress to pass a law, and it worked. Congress enacted the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act in 1980. Even more tellingly is what did not pass in the fall of 1980, and that was parallel oil spill legislation. In 1980, there were two bills in Congress, one on hazardous substances, the other on oil. And that's why CERCLA actually has a petroleum exclusion from it, because it was being dealt with in the other law. Only one of them passed in 1980, and that was the Superfund statute. The other one never passed, at least then. It took another decade for it to pass. It passed 10 years later, in 1990. And it passed soon after the Exxon Valdez went aground in Alaska. It took a catastrophe. To explain to people why you need these laws. Why does it take a catastrophe? Because a catastrophe is what best wakes people up in the real world to the consequences of failing to anticipate risk. Now, Exxon Valdez was in 1989. The Gulf oil spill was 20 years later, on April 20th, 2010. 2 months later, in June of 2010, the White House asked me if I would take on the job investigating the root causes of the Gulf oil spill by serving as executive director of the President's Commission. At that time, there were still thousands and thousands of gallons of oil going into the Gulf of Mexico every day. Now, there's a rich history for this kind of presidential investigatory commission. Not surprisingly, the first one began with the first president, George Washington. It arose during the whiskey insurrection of 1790, because the new government had a big debt from the Revolutionary War. And to pay that debt, they decided to impose taxes on domestic spirits. And folks in western Pennsylvania, wouldn't consider very west today, but then it was considered western Pennsylvania, rebelled. And the President of the United States, George Washington, sent in some presidential commissioners, peace commissioners, to try to talk sense into them. They failed, and he had to send troops in next. So it was an inauspicious beginning for the presidential commission. So really the first modern presidential investigatory commission is Pearl Harbor, right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt appointed Supreme Court Justice Owen Roberts to chair it and said, your charge is to discover any dereliction of duty, any errors in judgment that led to this tragedy. For me, my initial challenges were defined by the President's charge to the Commission, his executive order, where he said in pretty clear words what we were supposed to do. We were supposed to examine the relevant facts and according to root causes, supposed to identify the root causes of the spill, and we were supposed to develop options for guarding against and mitigating the impact of the spill. And being a lawyer and a law professor, I take this language quite literally. Now, why is this so challenging? It's so challenging because when you take on a job like this, I quickly discovered, it's very different than someone says, would you like to be executive director of the Federal Election Commission, or the Securities Exchange Commission, or the Federal Trade Commission? Because actually, when you take this on, the only thing that exists is you. There is no commission. You have some commissioners, but they're not employees. They're not actually, their job is to approve what you do, but they're not out there investigating at all. They're not full-time. They have their own jobs. Their job is to approve what you do. So you have nothing. You don't have a building. You don't have an office. You don't have a piece of paper. You don't have stationery, letterhead, computers, Blackberries, assistant. I had my student RA, who I went to and I said, I think my life is about to change. Would you like to come with me and do this instead? You can feel free not to. But the big challenge is you have to create this out of nothing. And that's hard. You have to go zero to create a commission as quickly as possible. And you have 6 months to complete your work. Now, if you compare that to other commissions, the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission, the 9/11 Commission, the Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission, those commissions tend to have 20 to 24 months to complete the reports. It's a big difference. And it's not just a factor of 4 between 6 and 24 because of the fixed time it takes to start up and end. So that's a very short period of time. What also made it challenging, in my instance, is the crisis is ongoing. You compare that to the other kinds of commissions. If you think of 3 Mile Island, or you think of the Space Challenger presidential commissions, with very similar wording in their executive orders. For those, you had an explosion, and then it's done. If you apply that to my situation, it would have been as if there had been an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon rig on April 20th. Some people had died tragically, and basically no oil had gone out. And that was all over at that point. Now, of course, if that had happened, we probably wouldn't have had a presidential commission. But our situation is completely different. We have an ongoing crisis that is capturing the American fears and everyone, because this thing is every day you can see it. You can see it coming out. You can turn on your computer and watch it coming out. It's like Pearl Harbor every day in terms of the risk and onslaught of millions of gallons of oil reaching one of the most precious coasts in the United States, surrounded with wetlands which will soak this oil up like a sponge. This isn't Alaska, where you can scrub it off of rocks. This is all wetlands along one of the most incredible ecological economic areas of the country. Enormous vibrancy. And it's still happening. It's not over yet. It's still happening. And that causes lots of issues. One big problem is that my clock is running and it's not over yet. So the facts aren't all in, but my 6 months is arguably ticking already. All the other commissions are after the fact, not during. But for mine, it's still happening at the same time that we're going. And that makes it much harder. The other reason it makes it much harder is the scope of our investigation is much greater. We don't just have to look at the causes, the root causes of the blowout itself. We then have to look at the causes of the failed containment effort afterwards, which is a major part of this, that they couldn't contain the well after the blowout. And that's not even done yet. It's going to take 87 days. It's not going to be until July 15th that we have the first initial containment. We actually don't have the well killed until about 8 weeks later. But my clock is running. I'm going to have to look at the blowout, the containment, and then I have to look at the response actions as well. And that dramatically increases the scope of my work. The blowout has just a few discrete players in industry and the federal government. The containment effort includes far more players in the private sector and the government. the response actions to the oil. Now I'm no longer dealing with just interior, or maybe the Department of Energy. If I'm actually going to oversee to try to see what kind of job they do on the response action, I'm now going from interior to EPA for its dispersants, the Army Corps of Engineers for its berms, for the Coast Guard for its oversight, for the Navy for burning the oil off. I mean, I have dramatically greater work that I need to do to try to figure out whether the response action happened as well. So a much greater increase. I also looked at the title of my commission. Words matter. And I assume when the President of the United States does this, and they write this, I have to take every word seriously. Notice they called us the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and offshore drilling. That means we actually have to opine on offshore drilling, more broadly, than large. Not just on the spill and what caused it, but the portent for the future of offshore drilling in the United States. That means Alaska, because that's where the big issue is. So it really means there's pressure on us to go in the Gulf of Mexico to talk about the future of offshore drilling in Alaska. They're also, at this point, exacerbating political factors. In case you didn't know, this is a highly politically charged time in the United States. Everything is political. There's a tendency for media folks and politicians to view everything as red, blue, Democratic, Republican, liberal, or conservative, even when it should not be. There should be nothing political about this kind of investigation, any more than there should be the Chief Justice Earl Warren's investigation of the Kennedy assassination. This should be a nonpartisan, straight down the line investigation, not a politically charged one. It should be fact-finding. But that's not the world we're in, unfortunately. And that affected our work. It affected the commission's work. The President of the United States nominated 7 commissioners. And this is my ultimate audience. Not my ultimate audience, my threshold audience. They're the ones who have to approve the work that I'm going to do with the staff. Because it's their imprimatur which gives it significance. 2 co-chairs. Former Senator and Governor of Florida, Bob Graham. Former EPA Administrator, Bill Riley. They chose a 2 co-chair approach. This has been the tradition recently. I don't actually like the tradition. It's a bipartisan approach. There's a Democrat, Bob Graham. There's a Republican, Bill Riley. I think these should be nonpartisan, not bipartisan. We're not going to find the facts by reaching a political compromise. We're going to find the facts by having a neutral investigation. Here are my commissioners. Don Bosch, President of the Center for Environmental Science at Maryland. Cherry Ulmer, Dean of the Harvard School of Applied Engineering. Terry Garcia, Vice President of National Geographic. Francis Beinecke, President of NRDC. And Fran Ulmer, former Lieutenant Governor of Alaska and Chancellor of the University of Alaska. So those are the 7 commissioners. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge for me. These are 7 spectacularly talented, smart, committed individuals. But that created a political challenge, which affected my work. And I have to worry about how I'm going to get this work done. What do you notice about that group? What's missing from that group?
Nobody of color.
Right? No folks of color. That's not what generates the headlines, though. No one from industry, right? No one from industry and no one from science with an actual expertise in oil and gas drilling. No one from the business community, really, and no one from sort of an expert engineer in oil and gas drilling, and, at least not obviously, no one from the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the Gulf of Mexico is its own place. It's its own culture. It's its own politics. And there's not anyone there, obviously from the Gulf of Mexico, with the exception of one person. And who's that? Bob Graham. But Bob Graham is from Florida. Florida is the one state against offshore drilling. And Bob Graham is a longtime opponent of offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. This is not going to make those other Gulf states very happy. It's not going to, Democrat or Republican, it's not going to make all those states and the industry happy. And then they're going to say, now where are the Republicans here? Since you're sort of doing this Republican. Well, the Republican is Bill Riley. Bill Riley is a fabulous person, a wonderful person, incredibly valuable. But most Republicans are not going to view Bill Riley as a Republican. Most Democrats are going to view Bill Riley as a Republican. He's the kind of thing Democrats like to think the Republican Party should be. Very progressive, liberal on lots of social issues, former president of the World Wildlife Fund. He's on the board of ConocoPhillips, but he's the environmentalist on the board of ConocoPhillips. So they're going to look at this and say, this is a stacked deck. This is a green, anti-drilling stacked deck. And we have our Gulf states and industry which depend upon this. Our revenues depend upon it. And you put the president of NRDC on it, which litigates against us. Let's just say they weren't happy. And they didn't feel any better when the executive director was named for it. Me. And my favorite line of this editorial from the Wall Street Journal was this one. So what's the upshot? The upshot is the President of the United States names us, creates us. He requests Congress to appropriate $15 million for our budget, requests subpoena authority for us, like every presidential commission is going to have, the subpoena authority. It passes the House within the first few days, like 423 to 1 or 2, at the end of June of 2010, and it never passes the Senate. Never comes to a full vote in the Senate. Budget or subpoena power. Never come to a vote. Instead, a lot of folks on the Senate side, without some support from the House side, when they look at that commission, there's Democrats and Republicans. They instead say, we think there should be a new commission. A new commission, a legislative commission to investigate the Gulf oil spill, with some picked by the president, some picked by the minority, some picked by the majority. And they tell the White House, we will pass your money for your commission if you support this commission. Well, that's a disaster. I've got two parallel commissions, one from the President of the United States, one from Congress, sort of going along. I mean, which is the commission, which is investigating? But this is the times we live in, and part of the makeup of the commissioners themselves helped create this issue. Other hindrances? In the legislative branch. FACA. The executive order made us a federal advisory committee. That's a challenge. If you're a federal advisory committee, that meant all our meetings had to be in public. That meant that all of our deliberations had to be in public. That means I have to come up with a consensus document for my 7 commissioners. And all the deliberations, everything has to be in public. It's hard to do that when you're doing an investigation, trying to get people to give you information about what happened in this very highly charged thing where all these lawsuits are going to be brought. I discovered this firsthand. We had our first thing, we're sworn in at the end of June. I sent an email to my commissioners and I say, all right, we're all going to meet for the first time on Tuesday where you get sworn in. If any of you are going to spend the night, Tuesday night, it'd be great if you come over to my wife's, our house for dinner that night. I think this is a nice thing to do, a social thing to do. They don't know me, I don't know them. We'll get a chance to meet and talk. I quickly get told by government ethics officers that would be a violation of FACA. To have that time, invite those people over your house, you have to have 30 days to notice in the Federal Register and have a public vote on it. I see that as, well, that's wrong. That is wrong. I mean, I don't believe it. But I say, I'm not going to fight this one. I'll save my FACA fights for when I care about my FACA fights. But that tells you some of the challenges that we had. All right, so how did we try to respond to this? The first issue was to look at the 6 months and then read the executive order really closely. Well, it's actually 6 months of the commission's first meeting. I can handle this. You know? If I told a student here, right, I said to you, all right, your paper's due, 4 weeks after we meet, want to meet this Friday? Yeah. I'd love to meet you this Friday, but I'm really busy. How about that? Nah, how about like 3 months from now? We'll meet 3 months from now. So the quick way to handle this is actually don't meet. Right? Don't meet, and then 6 months after your first meeting, it's triggered. In fact, if you look at all those commissions with their 20 and 24, they generally meet 4 months after their sworn, not right afterwards, because they aren't triggering their clock. So you wait. I look at this and I say to my commissioner, and they say, all right, look, it's end of June, June 30th. Let's meet in September. That's pretty quick. That's like all the other ones. September will give me time to like hire a staff, get an office, get equipment, vet people through all the confidential, and actually do some investigation and work. So we actually have that first meeting in September. We can give you something that we can start to present for hearings. So let's have the first meeting in September, and then our report will be done 6 months later. March, our report will be due. Or April, on the anniversary of these. How about that? What do you think the answer is? No. Why not? Why no? Why could we not wait till September? Because the crisis is going on. It's still happening. You still have, it's an ongoing explosion with spills. So the President's Commission is going to say, thank you very much. We know there's hundreds of millions of gallons of oil falling in the Gulf of Mexico. We'll see you. We'll come back in September. I mean, there was enormous pressure on the Commission to show they cared, to show they were engaged, to show they were out there. And enormous confusion about what we were doing because it was an ongoing crisis. Lots of people thought we should be containing the oil. We're the presidents. We should contain the oil. We should find a way to stop the oil from coming out. We should be in charge of overseeing the response action. We should overrule the President of the United States on his moratorium on deepwater drilling in the Gulf. Hard to convince people that you're a retrospective group when the problem is still happening. And that made it harder, again, for us to get our work done. So when do you think we had our first meeting? July 12th. And I told my commissioner, I said, look, I don't have a staff. Right? I've just now, by July 2nd, 3rd, 5th, I have an office now, One Thomas Circle, very nice office. But I need to hire people. If I have to hold a meeting on July 12th, I can't be hiring a staff between now and then, but I'm going to have to get consultants or someone as fast as possible to hold meetings. And it's going to delay things. They want on July 12th, and they're private, and there's some merit to what they want to do. You got to show that we exist. We got to show that we care. So on July 12th and 13th, we held 2 days of full-day nationally televised hearings on the Gulf oil spill, and we spent 2 days of site visits on the Friday and Saturday and Sunday before that in all the Gulf states, with commissioners spread out. When that is done, I'm trying to hire a staff as quickly as I can, because I need a staff. We actually need to do work. We don't need to read newspaper headlines. We need to do our work ourselves. We are a presidential commission, and we have to do our own work and not rely on the work of others. So I hired a staff of about 60. Staff was all in place by about the 2nd week of August with offices and computers and the rest. If you looked at my staff, I was looking for people who were nonpartisan, for straight down the line investigation. I had a zillion people from every environmental group in the world wanting to come work for me. I wouldn't hire them. We already look green. I didn't need that. I didn't need anyone who came with any ideological baggage or perceived ideological baggage. Our job was straight down the line what the facts were, to find it out. We needed to have a product at the end of the day that was credible, not one that looked like it was preconceived based on bias. I wanted people from business. I wanted people from industry. My working assumption is, actually, I thought the White House made a mistake with this commissioner. These are fabulous people. I would have if I were President of the United States, which I'm not, I would put on that some business people. When something like this happens, this kind of catastrophe happens, the business community cares deeply. It's their members who have died, 11 of them. They don't like to see mistakes done. They know what it means to the family. They know what it means to have the Gulf of Mexico shut down as a result of this. They feel deeply. They don't like mistakes done in their world. And they're ready quickly to judge it. And they have the expertise and the credibility to judge it. So I wanted some business people to make it clear that we weren't just some green democratic machine. So I hired a chief scientist and a chief counsel. Richard Sears was my chief scientist. 30 plus years with Shell Oil, doing drilling and exploration. Retired. Fabulous. Teaching at MIT and at Stanford. Real industry person, understands it, understands the technology, understands the drilling, and has credibility with that world. And knows how to talk, knows what he knows and what he doesn't know. And knows how to have the access to talk to people in the industry who know how to answer these questions. And Fred Bartlett as my chief counsel. Fred Bartlett, at the time, 77, now 78 years old, helicopter skis, West Point graduate, civil engineer, has his own law firm, Bartlett Beck, one of the best trial lawyer firms in the country, flies his own plane. Importantly, he did the investigation for industry of the Piper Alpha explosion in the North Sea rig, where 186 people died in the late 1980s. And his investigation was widely credited for identifying the problem. And he is well established enough that, like most lawyers out there, he didn't care about conflict. For a lot of lawyers, they wouldn't take this thing on because they're going to do 6 months of public service, and they and their law firms are going to be precluded from some of the most significant big litigation in the country, on whatever side. Bartlett, we called Fred Bartlett up. He said, "About time you called me." He was also, not incidentally, George Bush's trial lawyer in Bush v. Gore. Because George Bush wanted a really good lawyer. Not because he's a Democrat, not because he's a Republican. He wanted a tough lawyer. That's what I wanted. And very big tie with industry. They know him, they understand him, and they fear Fred Bartlett, former managing partner of Kirkland & Ellis. And it raised some eyebrows in the White House when they heard that I named Chief Counsel Fred Bartlett, who'd done the trial representing George Bush and Bush v. Gore. That was fine with me. I wanted a good lawyer, and that's what we were about. We're trying to send a message to everyone that we were not partisan. We were down the center. Here is our timetable we fixed. I met with our staff in early August. We had our first meeting about August 6th or so. And I said, all right, here's our timetable. Our report is due, actually it's not due January 11th, it was due January 12th. Remember, our first meeting was on July 12th. But my staff informed me that January 12th would be the 1-year anniversary of the Haitian earthquake. And we could not give the President of the United States a report on the 1-year anniversary of the Haitian earthquake because we wanted it to be the story of the day. So that eliminated a day. We had to give it to him January 11th. I did not like that because every day counts. So here we are. January 11th, we have to hand the President of the United States a completed report. We called GPO and said, all right, GPO, when do you have to have the report so we can hand it to the President of the United States on January 11th? And they said, you have to give it to us on December 21st. Because it has to be, and what you have to do is camera ready. Done. Done. Camera ready. All we're doing is taking pictures and putting it together. And we have to use GPO by law. So we need it December 21st, and any after that we cannot guarantee it. We'll give it to you for the President of the United States by January 11th. So you have until December 21st. That means all typos, all proof, index, everything done. Here it is, December 21st. Now you have to work backwards. All right, to do that, that means by December 10th, I need to have a fully approved document through all the commissioners, the whole report. If I'm going to then do the quality control necessary after that to make sure everything is right. This is not a law review article. Right? This is a presidential commission report on a highly visible topic where you can have lawyers like Jim Drag and the rest scouring this thing for mistakes for a long time. We have to have our credibility there. So we need time to make sure everything is right. And we had lots of fact finders to check every single fact in there to make sure it was right. December 10th. Now to do that, that means the last possible time I can get any draft chapters to commissioners is December 1st. If I'm going to try to work through the whole report and get consensus on the whole report to the commissioners, that's going to be by December 1st. Now to do that, that means I need the draft chapters for my staff no later than November 15th. Because I need to review it. I need to review and go through it and make sure this has a consistent, coherent voice, the whole report. That means they have to be done with their investigation by about November 1st. And we're starting about the first week of August. But you can't play with this. That's what it is. And I said to my staff, that's what it is. What I'm going to ask everyone to do is unreasonable and ridiculous. But that's what we're charged to do. And I'm deadline oriented. That's what we're going to do. We're going to get it done. But you have to know we can't change those dates. That's what we have. And I can't change any of those later dates, or earlier dates. If you don't get something to me on time on the earlier dates, if you don't get it to me, I can't, then we'll have less time for the next step. It doesn't work. We already don't have enough time for the next step. So nothing moves. No deadlines move. That's what we have. Outside my office was this chart. It showed every chapter and everything that had to happen. Findings, recommendations, drafts, everything that happened with specific dates on when everything was going to happen. For every chapter, review by the ED, final revision, likely findings, recommendations, subcommittee reports, review and comment. Every single thing had a date. And we had parallel teams. A team on containment, a team on the blowout, a team on response, a team on restoration. Everyone working simultaneously. We had people starting to work on Chapter 1 in August. You had to actually figure out how to construct the report in a way that you could have a great report done in time. So the context, the procedure, dictates how I'm structuring everything to get it done. We also couldn't hide. I'm a law professor. My preference would be, give me an assignment, thank you very much, my staff and I will disappear, we will come back on January 11th and give you a beautiful paper. But we couldn't do that. We had to show we were visible, we were there, we cared. So every month we had nationally televised hearings for at least 2 days in July, August, September, October, November, and December, with the commissioners up front. You have to tell the world that you're significant and important. So we did it with our venue, we did it with TV, we did it with how we set up the rooms. We did it by having placards, by having the commissioners way up, by having the lights where they are. You send a message of whether you're a bit player or you're a real player. And we were saying the message, we're a real player. We are the President's Commission on this. We also did it by issuing staff papers as we went, so people would know what we were doing, what we were finding. And by FACA, every time we gave a staff paper to the commissioners, it was then in the public domain. That's a problem. That's also an opportunity. It empowers the staff. Because what the staff says is being public domain. And we put out papers which made it clear we meant business. First paper came out October 6th, where we criticized the White House, the administration, for the underestimations of the oil flow at the beginning and the underestimations of the oil left at the end in August. We made clear our independence, from the administration, and received some very favorable press for doing so when the White House tried to quash what we were saying. If you give me a political job, I'll do a political job. If you give us a nonpartisan, non-political job, our job is to be nonpartisan, non-political, and they call it straight. That's what you do as a lawyer. Depends on your mission and what your charge is. They were not happy with me, but that was our job. We issued our own results of cement testing based on our own studies of Halliburton cement, which we were able to get the formula out of Halliburton when no one else had, including the United States. We did that because of Richard Sears, who had the trust of industry. And Chevron agreed to test the cement, which was an incredibly good and nice gesture by Chevron. Again, because we had credibility with some in industry at this point. And it led to some very significant stories about Halliburton cement, based on our own testing of that cement. So what did we accomplish? Well, that's the meeting on January 11th in the Roosevelt Room. We met the deadline, and the President of the United States the report on January 11th after getting the GPO on December 21st. We met the deadline. We were under budget. Originally, they said $15 million. We spent approximately $10 million to do our work, and during the Q&As, you can ask me where we got the money. We actually produced 3 products. The Commission's report, which is this document, a separate Chief Counsel's report, which is about 350, 400 pages, and an interactive website as well. That's the tip of the iceberg. There are about 20 staff papers on different topics, all of which are available on the website as of January 11th. Different products for different audiences. The final Commission report, that's for the President, for Congress, and industry, and the general public. It has 3 parts. The path to the tragedy, the explosion, the aftermath, and lessons learned. We deliberately decided to write it in an engaging narrative style, so anyone could pick it up and understand it. This is how it began, chapter 1, opening line. At 5:45 on Tuesday, April 20th, the Halliburton cementing engineer sent an email for the rig. He had good news. We had completed the job, and it went well. Those are the first lines of the report. That tells you the kind of report we're writing. You read that first chapter. You're there with the people on the rig. You know what they don't yet know as you read it. You know what's about to happen. And you see the people on the rig, the ones who made the most immediate mistake, they died. They weren't trying to make mistakes. They weren't doing it to put money in their pocket. They were making mistakes. And some of their mistakes cost the lives of their friends. You have to understand the root causes. What causes those mistakes? Not always look for good versus evil, but look for systems, look for structure, look for decision-making authority to try to figure out what happened. We had a whole chapter on recommendations, improving safety, safeguarding the environment, strengthening oil spill response, well containment capacity. And we had a chapter on the future of offshore drilling, consistent, obviously, with our title. We have a separate Chief Counsel's report. This report takes about 40 pages here and expands it to about 400 pages. And this is not for the faint-hearted. Chief Counsel is a misnomer. This is a highly technical engineering report written by very smart lawyers who you would think were highly accomplished engineers, but they're not. They're really, really smart lawyers who know how to talk to really, really smart engineers. Oh, actually, Barbara Dev agreed civil engineering, and one of my deputy chief counsels and a Master of Petroleum Engineering from Stanford, had worked on a rig and clerked for Justice O'Connor. We had some very good people. But that doesn't mean that they're experts on it. But very detailed report on every part of what happened on that rig. You couldn't possibly capture it here. In great detail. The interactive website version, you can click on these things and actually see how they work. See how deep water drilling works, see how centralizers work. This report, only apart from the one, this report saves lives. This report gets eaten up by industry and by Department of the Interior. No one wants to make mistakes. They want to do things right. They can't. And this report is out there and used in schools and engineering schools to have it not happen again. And of course the website. The website is for anyone, high school students. The history of offshore drilling, the history of regulatory oversight of offshore drilling. What happened minute by minute on the well. All quite interesting and very, very informative. So how did we achieve this, notwithstanding the hurdles? First, the deadline. Very hardworking staff, murderous timetable, high risk of failure. We actually did not know until December 20th. Actually, December 17th is when I decided we were going to meet the deadline. Before that, we had no idea. It would be a fact to meet the deadline. But you get the commissioners to all agree, get everything done, get all the fact checking done, everything done. We actually did not know. It was a murderous, but the deadline was enormously powerful. Because I could say to people on the staff, I could say to my commissioners, this is the deadline. Give it to me now, agree this, or I don't know. What will be? We won't meet the deadline. That gives you enormous leverage. The commissioners, actually the first time they approved the report, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I would have individual negotiation with 7 commissioners. I wouldn't do it with all 7 commissioners because, back up. One, draft. I would let them know where I thought there were disputes. I'd let them know where things were, where I needed to negotiate a consensus. And they would have to trust me when I said we have consensus on the chapter. When I announced we had consensus on a chapter, what did I not do? Show them the chapter. But I also couldn't game them. If we didn't have consensus, I wouldn't say that. But if I kept showing it to them, we'd never actually, because everyone would always, but when we really had it, I would tell them, and they would trust me. And they did trust me. And no one's complaining about anything we wrote. Because you have to actually reach closure on it. When we actually sent it to GPO, I didn't send it to all 7 commissioners at that moment. I waited until we got all the printed things back. We're done. Again, it works. It's not misleading. It's not playing games with them. It's getting consensus so we can have a finished product. And they were delighted with the finished product. But you have to have things in order to get things done. The other thing we did, we were under budget. $10 million, not $15 million. That's because no one got rich. We paid government rate. Brett Bartlett, I paid $65 an hour. A partner from his firm, about 47 years, another one who clerked for Justice O'Connor with an engineering degree, I paid $55 an hour. I paid no one over a GS-15 rate. Richard Sears, I paid, I think he was $60 an hour. This was public service. You shouldn't be doing this work to get wealthy. You're doing this work because it's important public service to do it. And people will do that. They'll do it. Trial Graphics is absolutely unbelievable graphics we had. We negotiated a very good deal from them. And they were willing to do it, public service. And they did such a great job at this that their phones are ringing off the hook for all the people who want them to do more work there. It's smart business, too. We came well under budget. And people will do it. You pay them, you don't try to make them rich in this kind of situation. All right, so what did the commission find? Oh, actually, one thing I got to mention. We also had Fred Bartlett. And Fred Bartlett could rub some people the wrong way. Remember, we did not have subpoena authority. We had a walking subpoena. You need subpoena authority. We had Bartlett. And Bartlett would call these people up. And he'd say, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. And they would trust him. And if they say no, he said, look, I really think you're not doing your company a service. Have you talked to the board about this? Lawyers? Because I think if you talk to your board, explain what's going on here. They're not making a smart business decision. You do not want me to hold a press conference and say that 11 Americans died on April 20, 2010, and my only job is to make sure that doesn't happen again, and they won't cooperate. I am the best game you have in town. I'm not suing anybody. I'm not prosecuting anybody. My only job is to find out what happened, to tell the American people the present so it doesn't happen again. And he was incredibly transparent in ways I never would have done. But it's very effective. He'd say, we had a big hearing in November. Brett Bartlett would say, all right, the hearing is next week. BP or Halliburton or Transocean, come to my offices. I will show you what I'm going to say on Monday. I'll go through my thing. I'll do it for you. You tell me anything I'm saying that's wrong. If it's something that's wrong, I'll change it. If it's not wrong, I'm not. He would show it to them ahead of time. He'd say, this is what I'm going to say. Before we put out the Halliburton cemented, we showed it to Halliburton. Said, this is what we're going to say. Now, if you think we got something wrong, tell us. And you've got to have confidence to do that. And if they could convince us we were wrong, we would change things. If they couldn't, we wouldn't. They would be unhappy. But you give people a chance, it gives you credibility. If you have that kind of self-confidence. And he did. That was very effective. Our report itself, before the Chief Counsel's report came out, they were invited in. They actually read some draft. They couldn't take it with them. They could sit in an office right next to mine. They could sit there and they said anything wrong. We wouldn't necessarily change it, but again, if a big mistake, we made a mistake, we change it. You got to convince us a mistake has been made. If it hasn't, we're not changing it. Very impressive on his part. All right, so what did they find? I'm just going to highlight some of the things were found on the blowout itself. We surprised some people. We did not say no to deep water drilling. A lot of people thought we'd say deep water drilling can't be done. We didn't. We said, actually, it doesn't have to be abandoned. It can be done safely. This is a central message of the report. A lot of people don't notice that in there. That's a big deal. It's an amazing technology. It has yielded enormous benefits to this country. And there's enormous potential. But it has to be done safely. And it can be done safely. To say it can be done safely doesn't mean it is being done safely, but it means it can be done safely. We also said we didn't think that well design by itself, a lot of people said, was sort of fundamentally flawed. It wasn't what a lot of people did, but we didn't think the well design itself was necessarily flawed. It led to the creation of certain risks that then had to be dealt with. But that's different than saying it was an improper, fundamentally flawed well design. We instead found a series of mistakes made by a bunch of major companies where they failed to do and conduct overall risk management. That was by the three parties, BP, Halliburton, Transocean, and by the federal agency responsible for its oversight. Our conclusion was none of them were considering the accumulated risks of this deep water drilling. They had not taken account of the increased risk as we move to ever deeper waters. The biggest challenge one faces when you do deeper and deeper drilling anywhere, but including the Gulf of Mexico, we're talking like miles beneath the surface of the ocean. It's amazing what they can do these days, these engineers. But when you're doing that, as you're going further and further down, you've got to maintain the equilibrium just right. Because the pressures in these reservoirs way, way down the bottom of deep oceans, the temperatures and the pressures are huge. That's fabulous, the temperatures and pressures are huge, because it means you're not going to spend a lot of money to push this stuff out, because when you tap into it, it comes out. But it means that when you're going down, you've got to maintain the pressure just right. You have just enough pressure for when you go in, it doesn't overcome your pressure and push you out, and not too much pressure when you go in that you push it out and fracture the reservoir. You fracture the reservoir, you've got uncontrolled leak and spillage all over the bottom of the ocean, which you can do nothing about. So as you drill down, you've got to do it just right. You do it through drilling mud weight, You do it through the cementing process as you're going down. Use this very carefully calibrated to get it just right. And the margin of error gets smaller and smaller as you go down. And they're pretty good at this with amazing results. And this one they stopped. But you've got to do it just right. And then they made some mistakes. The margin of error gets smaller as you go down, but you have to take into account of the increasing risks of doing so, of how you set up your well. And they made mistakes in the cement. The cement is crucial. The cement is what stops, keeps everything in place, puts pressure, and stops releases going up the side of the pipe going down, of the angles. And the Halliburton cement we found, we had good reason to believe the cement was flawed. It wasn't stable. Without stable cement, the whole thing can collapse. And there weren't sufficient centralizers to keep it in place. We found mistakes in the temporary abandonment procedure. One of the most crucial things you do is once you actually produce it, you've got the oil and gas under there, what you do is you abandon your site. You cap off in the bottom of the ocean, you cap it off, you move your rig away, and later on you come back with your rig, a production rig. You've got to cap it off. You've got to do it just right. Get the pressures just right when you're capping it off. And BP kept changing its procedures every few days. And what they were going to do in which order. I'm going to place the mud here, and they'll put this stuff there, try to get it just right. They kept changing it with very little oversight from the federal government. And one of the most risky and important series of decisions being made. You can see the blow-up finally happening, and when it happened. And we saw emails which said April 17th. They're talking about what they're trying to do and how they're trying to make decisions over this. And look what they say on April 17th. We're flying by the seat of our pants. That's from a BP engineer of the time. One of the most important things you do when you're trying to decide whether things are in equilibrium, you do a series of tests. Positive pressure tests, negative pressure tests. It turns out there is very little training to do these negative pressure tests to make sure there's no leakage, everything's in equilibrium. There's no rules at all, oversight by the federal government for how these tests should be done. And very little training by BP. And it failed the pressure test over and over again. That was a warning. Problem, no equilibrium. The people on the rig explained it away. They explained it away. They said that's the bladder effect. No one knows what the bladder effect was. The person who said it was the bladder effect, the person everyone trusted, he died. He didn't want to make a mistake, but he did make a mistake. The Transocean employees on the rig are looking at signs, trying to see what's happening. And there were signs of a problem. There were kicks, pressure kicks. They should have alerted that we have a problem. Stop the process. Where do you see it? There it is, right there. Now you would think when you're spending billions and billions of dollars in this amazing technology, you could spend a little bit more money, maybe a few $100s, to create monitor systems that would actually show you what is the problem. If a certain situation, maybe a red light would go, But instead, there's been no effort anywhere commensurate with the amazing technology we're doing for drilling to think about the risk and how to manage the risk well. Because people were assuming away the problems. The most controversial thing that we concluded was that the problems were, as we said, systemic. People were very unhappy with us saying these problems were systemic. In my view, that's clearly correct. What's the basis? General industry failure to match investment in drilling technology with risk management and with response and containment. The mistakes here were made by the three biggest players, BP, Halliburton, Transocean. These are not marginal players. Transocean is the largest operator of rigs in the Gulf. BP, one of the, if not the largest, lessee of deep water. Halliburton supplies the cement to basically everybody. These are the people making mistakes. And BP told everyone in their papers, if there's a well blowout, we can contain it. We have the technology to do it. And every single oil company said the same thing in their papers. Every single one of those major oil companies told the United States, we have the technology to contain it, and they were all wrong. That's a systemic problem. They all said it, and when this well blew out, they all didn't have it. Now, what they managed to accomplish in 87 days without that technology was pretty amazing. You got to give credit to the BP engineers for what they did in 87 days. Lack of planning, inexcusable. But what those engineers did with lack of planning in 87 days that actually capped that well was very impressive. We're lucky it was BP. If that had been a fly-by-night marginal organization company with that well blowout, which it could have been, they would have declared bankruptcy on April 21st, and who knows how we would ever have capped that well. No less systemic was the government. Democrat and Republican administrations alike were seduced by the profits. This part of Interior is the second largest generator of revenue for the federal treasury after the IRS. Billions and billions of dollars. Everyone liked the money flowing in. The Democratic administrations liked it, Republican administrations liked it. And all of them were advocating the responsibilities to ensure that this resource that belongs to the nation and future generations was being developed safely. Just a final couple thoughts. I'm not going to claim that running one of these things is particularly good for one's health. But on balance, I thought we did a good job. And now it's the responsibility of industry and the government to take the necessary steps. And we have a lot of recommendations. Department of Interior has done a lot of them on its own. A lot of very good structural reforms done with the Interior. And industry has taken some good steps as well. Not everything we think they should do, but they've actually done a fair amount. Where there's been nothing done is Congress. Congress has not passed anything, any legislation in response to this oil spill. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. There are good resources to be developed safely, but it takes some resources to do it. And instead people complain about the pace of the development. But you can't have the pace return to where it could be unless you have the regulatory resources at the same time. Because that's not responsible. But Congress has not done, a lot can be done without Congress, but Congress hasn't done anything. Contrast that to the 1970s. Contrast that even to 1990. There was a time when it took a catastrophe to get things done. Now, you can't even get it done when you've had a catastrophe. And it doesn't take much of a reminder to think what that means. It may well be that this Gulf oil spill will not prove to be the unbelievable disaster we thought it was going to be in the summer of 2010. We'll not know the long-term damage until we have the long-term. But the reason to think it's not going to be as tragic as we feared back then. But just a few months after we stopped, in the spring of 2011, you can see what happens if you don't plan for tragedy. This is a tsunami and the nuclear power plants in Japan. That is an unmitigated disaster. That's failure to plan. Little small decisions, save a little bit of money here and there, cause tremendous irreversible problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I feel like I'm here and hearing here for you. But so we have some time for questions. These have been placed hopefully strategically around the room, and hopefully we'll. I guess we have a volunteer to collect them. While Professor Mancometto is grabbing those, I first wanted commend to everyone the Commission's multimedia presentation on their website.
You can actually you can download everything for free,
right.
Of course.
It's wonderful. I think it's fantastic. It's certainly for those teachers in this room too. I think it's quite impressive. I'll start with the I guess the convener's prerogative with my first question, and then we'll grab some of these as well. Early on, you mentioned that you wanted the commission that the commission should be nonpartisan, not bipartisan. What was interesting to me is that it sounded like your staff choices were in part interested in seeming even-handed. So on the one hand, you were looking for competent people, but on the other hand, in light of the perception of the commissioners' green bent, I guess my question would be, how might a president or a Congress develop a nonpartisan versus a bipartisan commission? Is it to not worry about perception, or is it to try to be balanced?
What I would do is I wouldn't do. I mean, actually, I'm very proud of what we did. We overcame a lot of it. But if I were doing this, I wouldn't have a prominent Democrat and a prominent Republican as the co-chair. That sends out the message this is a bipartisan endeavor. I never said it's bipartisan. I would say it's nonpartisan. I would have one chair. It's very hard to have two co-chairs with the executive director. I'd rather have one. And I'd have them be a non-political person. I'd have them be someone who's distinguished in the field. And that could be someone from industry as far as I'm concerned, but someone without a particular axe to grind. But I wouldn't have them be like Democrat and Republican. I'd have another kind of credential. I'd have them be one person rather than two there. Now we did it. It worked fine. And I can tell you, and as I say, there aren't some advantages. Bob Graham and Bill Riley, amazingly skilled people. Amazingly skilled. I mean, it was. I learned a lot from working from them. The use of the media, the use of the limelight. These are very skilled people that way, and that was important. But I thought, on balance, I would rather have one than two. Since there's lots of ambiguity, especially if you're executive director.
You don't think you would have been successful hiring Ralph Nader?
No, I'm not saying depends who you get. But you take someone who doesn't look like X. I'll tell you somebody who did a fabulous job with the commission was James Baker. Jim Baker. Investigating the Texas refinery, BP's Texas refinery disaster. Jim Baker's report, which was a BP report, not a government report. Jim Baker's report, BP hired him to do an internal investigation of what happened. I mean, it is unbelievably tough. It takes no prisoners, it calls every mistake. It's a really harshly written, very impressive report done by Jim Baker. There's no reason to think that industry people aren't going to take their task seriously if you pick the right kind of people who realize they're working for the public, and this is a public service, and they're as patriotic as anybody can be. You got to figure out who you're picking and what their job is. But that report, it's a great report. It's a great report. And that was an internal report. It wasn't a government report. I think you would be hard pressed to pick Jim Baker for this because of his ties to the oil and gas industry were so much. But I'll tell you, he probably would have done a great job here.
So great. So the next question is, I'm going to combine two of them actually. To what extent was your job an exercise in investigation versus dispute resolution? And procedurally, how did you work to achieve consensus? Was the science clear?
Most of it was just investigation. It really was. My staff was really just investigating and saying their views. There was some negotiation which had to be done with the 7 commissioners on the final language of the report. And for that one, I mean, I can tell you what, if you saw my office during that, I would go in the morning at 6 in the morning. I'd leave about 10:30 at night. I would have my multiple screens. I'd have my WordPerfect document of a chapter. I'd have 7 different versions of comments from my 7 different commissioners, and I would try to work out what I thought was a consensus for all of that, and I would send back to them individually where I thought were the words that we had some dispute over or not, and we'd work it out. And they did a great job. And one person I will single out, and I've done this every time, even when there wasn't someone from NRDC in the audience, was Frances Beinecke, who was president of NRDC. I think Frances Beinecke is fabulous. She's a fabulous environmental. I was very worried about Frances Beinecke as one of the commissioners. Not because I'm not a huge fan of hers in the organization. But on its face, I thought it was a mistake to have a president of a leading advocacy organization as one of my commissioners, because she would have difficulty reaching consensus and compromise with other people on what we were going to say. When her organization is one which is out there with established positions. And I need someone who can work with the other commissioners about what we're saying. I don't need someone who can't talk and can't budge. So I was very worried about having someone with that kind of responsibility to her own organization. She did a great job. She did a great job. And she did compromise. She compromised, she discussed. I had commissioners, I'll tell you, towards the end, we had moments when there would be dissenting opinions. When it looked like people were going to walk and not sign on to things. But at the end, we'd work out language, we'd figure out a way to write around this to satisfy people. Not on chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's how I planned it. Notice the structure of it. I pushed all the recommendations to chapter 9. And that was so I could get consensus of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 earlier. And I would say to them, we'll deal with that in chapter 9. We'll deal with that in chapter 9. Just to prove chapter 1, 2, 3. We'll do chapter 9, chapter 9. It's coming, it's coming. And then chapter 9, we had 90 versions of chapter 9 in 10 days. And that's fine. There's a lot to discuss about. There's a lot there to debate. To figure out what your recommendation is. That's different than the findings. And to figure out what we should say about the future. And we worked it out. And reached it. But that's a lot of back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Which actually almost killed it. But you do it. And you get it done.
Great. 90 versions.
Yeah, no, I counted up how many versions of chapter 9 I had. I actually will tell you now, for any lawyers out there, Jim, I don't have a single document from my work on the commission. Not one document. The last thing we had to do to tell you how awful this is, we started closing the commission down in November. I had a group working on closing the commission starting in November. And that's because the commission had to do at the end what it had to do at the beginning. We didn't exist 2 months after we handed a report to the president. I don't never had a job like that, where you don't exist. That means you have to close it down. That means you have to have no paper, no office, no computers, no Blackberries, no employees as of March 11th. So we had to do the exact opposite. We started that process. That meant all these documents. I had 23,000 emails myself. We had hundreds of thousands of emails. We had millions of pages of documents. All that material had to be classified, what's confidential, what's not, put under the Government Registers Act, and turned over to DE so we could walk away. And I took nothing with me. And I would love to have drafts. I'd love to have the memos that are about FACA with me. I have nothing. The reason I have nothing is so lawyers can't come after me with discovery requests to be bulletproof. Because if not, there's too much money involved. But I have nothing. I have no zero, which is frustrating. I actually went, I wish I remember what I wrote about this. So I have none of the versions, none of the chapters, zero.
I thought I had found out why your laptop had crashed.
Yeah.
Do you believe that the absence of subpoena power hindered the investigation? Why was the commission not given this authority?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't given the authority just because we became a political football, like everything else that happens in Washington, D.C. We clearly should have been given the authority. It was, I thought, fairly outrageous. We were never given that authority. I think that, on balance, we were really not prejudiced much at all. And that was because of a few things. One, Barbara was really good. My lawyers were very good. I had these great lawyers, a lot of very young lawyers, too. And the other was we established credibility. And then there was also this really wonderful thing, and that is we had these different responsible parties, all who wanted to point fingers at the other responsible parties. So they were very happy to meet with us and tell us all the things that had done wrong by the other company, and so that was very helpful.
So how would your commission likely have played out if you had had a natural disaster without an obvious industrial source or only a partial human cause?
Yeah, I mean, basically, that's a tsunami. That's Japan. It changed the analysis. It just means that you have to prepare for a risk created by others. So you wouldn't have the part of the study which is on what were the root causes of the blowout. You'd have it in terms of the preparation for the risk created by a natural cause. So we just eliminate one step of it. Let me ask one question, by the way. I promised I would. The money issue, what happened to our $15 million? Well, in mid-July, about July 23rd, something like that, I got a call from the White House on a Friday. Remember, they said, there seems to be a problem. I mean, this legislation doesn't seem to be happening. We're not sure you can pay your people. I was not a happy person because I made people leave their jobs, and they left their jobs. I had a lot of young people who left firms and the rest to come do this. And I had staff. I had legal assistants. I had people who couldn't carry themselves without this kind of income. There's a lot of income, but still it's income. And so I remember I just said to the folks in the White House, I said, that's not tenable. I'm not going to spend any time on this. You spend your time on it. The President of the United States created a commission. He said we were supposed to do this. And so your job is to find the money. It's not my job to find the money. Because it's on your plate if we don't have the money. But people have to be paid. I remember one great discussion where he said, well, we'll see what we can do about the $12 million. Because one of the committees had approved $12 million instead of $15 million. I said, well, why 12? The President of the United States said $15 million. He said, well, the committee. I said, that's not Congress, it's a committee. If Congress passes 12, then we'll have to worry about it. But the President of the United States said 15, Congress has passed nothing. I expect 15. We spent 10, because I don't like to spend money unnecessarily. The way they do this, I now learn, is they find the money. They found some unappropriated funds in certain parts of DOE which hadn't been spent yet, and they swept it.
Who was he?
Oh, what?
Who was he?
Who was he? Did I not say?
No.
Yeah.
So, did you examine deeper the factors for failed oversight beyond that revenues to Treasury?
Oh yeah. We've got a whole chapter which looks at the. It's quite interesting. A lot of it had to do with the structure of the federal agency itself. The agency and the Department of Interior was responsible for both revenue raising and oversight. So they were brought together. Actually, it was a organizational reform accomplished by James Watt in 1981 to bring the two together that way. That caused the revenue part to overwhelm the oversight part. They've now been separated out. And also just lack of training, a lack of resources, lack of requesting money for the engineers and the inspectors. And again, Democrats and Republicans both sort of played a role in that. But lack of expertise, lack of reforming the rules, efforts made to reform the rules in the 1990s, beaten down by the American Petroleum Institute over and over again. We came down fairly harshly, the American Petroleum Institute. We came away through a distinct impression, which was something told to us by the major oil companies who would never say it publicly. And that was that when you have a group like API, a trade association involved in this kind of work, they tend to go to the lowest common denominator. They tend to try to have rules and regulations which the least able in the industry can satisfy, because they're trying to sort of appeal to their entire organization. And I think that's led to some serious under-regulation, under-resources of the federal agency. One thing we did find, there were all these reports about corruption and all the rest in different offices of Interior. There was some of that was happening. We didn't feel it played a major role here. We came with a lot of respect for a lot of individual career people who I think some of them were unfairly maligned in the effort of people to sort of find a sort of a bad person rather than a faulty system.
So, should there be criminal liability? If so, whom?
The executive order quite expressly said that nothing the commission said should provide an answer to civil liability or criminal responsibility. And so we were very careful to say what we thought the root causes were, what the mistakes were, but not to reach a conclusion about civil liability or criminal liability. and to be true to that requirement of the executive order, I don't say.
So a broader question in that respect is, obviously you've been a litigator and you're familiar with other frameworks for fact-finding. What do you think the value is of commissions like this versus others like litigation in investigating complex problems?
Yeah, I think it's a huge advantage, and that is because we're not litigating. We really were trying to explain to the American people what happened, and explain to policymakers and lawmakers what happened, and to find out. That's not the purpose of civil litigation or criminal litigation. It's not the purpose of a congressional oversight hearing, which is reaching for the sort of the first person who's willing to say something in public. It's to take a step back and to tell a story, and to try to tell it in a very neutral, matter-of-fact manner. And then, a civil trial doesn't do that. You've got these two warring parties out there, and there's no report that's done at the end. One thing I'll tell you is that I hated that 6-month deadline. I mean, it really was just brutal. We're very lucky we had that 6-month deadline. And that's because the American people have a very short memory. And if we had 2 years, which would be the normal, who would have even heard of the Gulf oil spill on April 2012? And so it was a very hard, unreasonable deadline, but it actually served us quite well in retrospect, that we had to do it when people were still thinking about the Gulf oil spill. And our report was the first report out. There have been a series of reports since then, but I think they're pretty much consistent with everything that we said. But the 6 months, I mean, if I wrote people, I'd say don't make it 6 months, but I think that's crazy. I have to say we benefited from the fact it was 6 months.
Great. So last question, and then we'll have our reception. The government estimates that up to 6 million gallons of oil was released and not recovered or burned off. BP claims as little as 1.6 million gallons. Who is more right?
Well, on that one, we were close to the government, and so I think our report is consistent with that. I will say that some information has come out since then, which we never did evaluate. The report after that BP has put out, which does cast some questions about the estimates at the time. But at the time, we thought the government, well, based on information we had as of December 2009, 2010, we were more confident with the government measure. But I'll tell you, the real problem here, which is again part of our recommendations, is there was no flow measurements down there at all. It'd be very easy to have them there. It doesn't cost anything, but no one had put down flow. In the future, there'll be flow measurements down there. You won't have these wild guesstimates. And this time you had all kinds of problems with BP wouldn't give access to some people, and so they had trouble measuring at the time. All that stuff can be worked out in the future. BP, this is litigation now. And the amount of BP's fine depends upon how much oil was spilled out. So BP is going to say it's this amount. The United States, amount of fines they collect depends on the amount of oil that comes out, so they're going to say this amount. But this is litigation, which is different than fact finding.
Great. Well, thank you very much,
Thank
Richard.
you.